My name is Elijah Carter. I was born in 1972 in Birmingham, Alabama. By the time I turned 8, I already knew what fear felt like. Not the kind of fear from thunderstorms or monsters under the bed, but the quiet kind. The kind that clings to you like humidity in the summer.
I am Patricia, Elijah's younger sister. I remember walking through the school hallways, hearing the whispers behind us. There goes Carter's kids. Trouble follows them. But we weren't the trouble. We were just noticeable. Too noticeable.
I remember Mrs. Jenkins, our third-grade teacher, who always called on the white kids first. When I raised my hand, she looked past me. When I got a perfect score on the spelling test, she said, "Well, I guess even a broken clock's right twice a day."
We learned young that silence was our armor, that walking fast, looking down, and never talking back might just keep us out of trouble. And yet, trouble had a way of finding us, not because of what we did, but because of what we were.
At recess, I wasn't allowed on the jungle gym with the white kids. The teacher said it was just too crowded. But I saw the empty rungs. I saw the looks they gave me. Fear, disgust, confusion.
And yet we smiled, because if we didn't smile, we were angry. If we spoke up, we were loud. And if we cried in secret.
In the narrow alleys of Detroit's East Side, the hum of industry had long given way to silence. Factories once roaring with power had turned into mausoleums of forgotten labor. Malik walked those alleys now. His feet knew each crack in the pavement, just like his ancestors had known the cracks in the slave ship's wooden floors.
They told me this city was built on dreams, I murmured, staring at the rusted skeleton of what once was a tire plant. But whose dreams, though? Not ours. We were the gears, never the drivers.
Generations of black families had labored here, their sweat absorbed into the bricks, their hopes poured into the metal. But as automation rose and corporations chased profit overseas, the neighborhoods were left behind. Stripped of jobs, schools gutted, police patrols increased.
I remember my uncle yelling, "They don't build prisons for trees, they build them for us." And I didn't understand it then. Now I do. Prisons popped up like fast food joints, and my friends disappeared just as fast.
But the city remembered. In the murals painted under bridges, in the rhythm of spoken word on community stages, in the hands of grandmothers raising their grandchildren on meager pensions. Detroit still spoke, still resisted, still endured. He had never been inside a cell before, not even on school trips to mock courthouses. But now, Jerome sat against the cold metal wall of holding cell number 3 in the 8th precinct, arms wrapped around his knees, staring at the concrete floor as if it might open and swallow him whole.
I didn't do anything. I was just walking.
The silence was only broken by the buzz of the flickering ceiling light. Across from him, a white boy in a hoodie was slouched on the bench, scrolling his phone, already released by the look of his open cell door.
Why him? Why am I still here? Why does it always happen like this? Why does my skin feel like a target, like a curse I didn't choose?
3 hours. That's how long it took before a public defender came by. A tired woman in flat shoes and a crumpled suet, who looked at Jerome as if she'd seen 1,000 just like him. She didn't ask what happened. She only read the charges.
Loitering? Loitering? That's what they call standing on your own block now.
The courtroom smelled like mildew and fatigue. When Jerome finally stood before the judge, the prosecutor didn't even look up from his desk. He asked for time served and community service. Jerome nodded numbly.
This wasn't justice. This wasn't fairness. This was a conveyor belt. And I was just another product rolling through, slapped with a sticker that read, "Guilty enough."
When he finally stepped outside, blinking against the harsh morning sun, a breath caught in his chest. His mother stood there, in silence. Her eyes didn't need to say anything. Jerome saw it all. The fear, the anger, the exhaustion carved deep into her face.
"I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for scaring you."
She took his hand, gripped it tighter than she ever had before, and they walked home, not defeated, but changed. Another line carved into the story of a boy trying to be seen as more than just a shadow. The summer of 1969 was sweltering in the south side of the city. Heat pressed against the windows of broken-down homes, and even the shade of the willow trees offered no comfort. In the heart of this heat, young Marcus stood in front of his grandmother's mirror, tugging at the stiff collar of his Sunday shirt.
He wasn't dressing for church that morning. He was dressing for war. Not with guns, not with fists, but with words, with marching feet, and with the defiance in his eyes. The community was preparing to march to City Hall, demanding justice for the wrongful arrest of Elijah Thomas, a black schoolteacher accused of assault with no evidence, no trial.
The streets were lined with people, old and young, arm in arm. Marcus held tightly to his grandmother's hand. She had marched before, in Selma, in Montgomery. She told him, "You don't march with your legs, baby. You march with your spirit. That's what they can't chain."
As they walked, they sang. Old spirituals mixed with chants for justice. Police lined the sidewalks, hands resting on batons. Some jeered, some were silent, but none stepped forward to listen.
When they reached City Hall, Marcus saw it for what it truly was. Not just a building of laws, but a fortress of indifference. Speakers took turns at the mic, and then his grandmother, trembling but proud, stepped forward. Her voice shook the stone.
She spoke not of anger, but of truth, not of vengeance, but of memory. She spoke of Emmett Till and Medgar Evers, of her own husband who never returned from a prison sentence for a crime he didn't commit.
Marcus watched her, and for the first time understood what legacy meant. Not the inheritance of pain, but the insistence to never forget. The march ended it in silence, but the silence was louder than any shout. Jerome sat beside Malik and Grace. They'd organized a community meeting. Everyone from teachers to teenage poets had shown up. The air was thick with anticipation, hymnals and protest flyers stacked side by side.
"Tonight," Grace began, voice steady, "we name our pain so it cannot hide. We claim our right to walk our streets without fear." She looked at each face in the crowd, young and old, worn and hopeful.
One by one, they spoke. A grandmother who lost her son to prison. A teacher who'd watched her students' potential crushed. A young man who survived a traffic stop turned nightmare. Each story was a brick in the wall of their shared resolve.
When it was Jerome's turn, his voice quavered. "I sat in that cell," he said, "and I felt erased. But tonight, I reclaim my place among you. He held up a slate. On it, the names of those who'd suffered, hope and grief carved into chalk.
The congregation rose as one, voices joining in an anthem of defiance. The old organ trembled, windows rattled. In that moment, their silence broke, and the roots beneath the concrete stirred. After that morning at the precinct, Jerome and his mother returned to their neighborhood, a place both familiar and fractured. Corner stores stood shuttered, their windows scrawled with "Gentrify or Die," and playgrounds lay empty under rusted swings. Yet life pulsed in the cracked sidewalks. Children's laughter mixed with the distant roar of traffic. Protests hung in the air like unspent fireworks.
I stood at the crossroads where 8th Street met Parker Avenue. This intersection had witnessed my first steps, my first ride on a bike, before the chain snapped and the world snapped at me. Now the same corner judged me again, its graffiti-stained walls whispering, "Here comes Carter's boy."
He noticed Maria first, a teenager in a hijab, handing out flyers about a community meeting. Her smile was weary but determined. She spoke of rebuilding the local center, of literacy workshops, of safe spaces for young women. Jerome watched her slip a flyer into his mother's hand as they passed.
My mother studied the flyer at our kitchen table. "A chance to speak," she murmured. "A chance to build." I realized then, activism wasn't just marching or shouting. It was joining hands with people you never thought you'd meet.
That evening, Jerome walked to the meeting. The hall was packed. Elders in church dresses, young fathers cradling toddlers, activists clutching notebooks, volunteers passing out snacks. The air was thick with hope and worn linoleum dust.
Maria spoke first. Her voice was calm even when she confessed fear. "I worry every time I walk home at night," she said, "but I worry more if we stay silent." She invited us to form committees: education, safety, art. Each word built a bridge.
Jerome raised his hand when asked for questions. His voice shook. "How do we know they'll listen?" The hall paused. Then Mrs. Thompson, the retired teacher, whispered, "Because we speak together now." Applause rolled like thunder.
Walking home under flickering streetlights, I realized the roots beneath the concrete were not just old hurt. They were strength. They were the reason I woke up each morning, the reason I kept marching, even when the world whispered I didn't belong.